All right, welcome back, Prospects Live viewers, to another 2020 MLB Draft Team Preview. Joining me today, Chris Hatfield from SoxProspects.com. Welcome, Chris, to the show. We're going to jump into my favorite team, my hometown team, the Boston Red Sox here. Just going back a little bit on their history, there's obviously been some flux in the front office, new GM, new regime. But going back the last couple of picks, last year they didn't have a first rounder. Cameron Cannon went to them at 43 in the second round. Tristan Cassis the year prior in 2018 at 26, and then Tanner Houck at 24 back in 2017. So, Chris, we'll pull up the graphic here for the Sox. Talk to me a little bit about what you think, the approach is going to be, team-wise this year, obviously losing their second round pick and some changeovers in the front office.
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as their approach to the draft this year at 17 overall, it's going to be get the best player available at any cost. It'll be interesting to see if anybody falls due to some teams maybe tightening up the budget a little bit, maybe wanting to go with more of a signability pick earlier in the first round than we've seen teams do in the past. And I think the Red Sox will be willing to take advantage of that like they did in, say, 2016 when Jay Groom fell to them at 12 overall. Due to some signability concerns, some off-field concerns, they were willing to go ahead and pop them and try and get the best upside available. I wouldn't be surprised if they try and do that in this situation as well. A lot of the names that we're hearing connected to them are, high school guys, upside picks, a lot of high school arms, which is a demographic that's kind of devalued these days. Maybe they see that as an opportunity to zig while everyone else is zagging. So I think it's going to be best player available at 17. As far as they obviously, like you said, they don't have a second round pick. The last time that happened, they were picking number 7 overall. So I don't know how much you can really compare that when a guy like Benintendi falls into their laps at 7. But, for the 3rd through 5th rounds, we've seen a real willingness for them to stick with college guys at those spots. Last year, they went really college heavy. This year's draft is really heavy on some college arms. When we did the mock draft a few weeks ago, Ian and I nabbed a college arm at 89 overall that we were really happy with. Wouldn't be surprised to see the Red Sox do the same thing and bring a guy into the pitching program that they've got set up and see what they can get out of guys. They've had some really good results doing that so far. As far as the new regime, I don't know how much Chaim Bloom's really going to matter on that side of things. His background, obviously he touched everything in the Rays system when he was there, but it's not like he's coming from an amateur background. I would expect really the fact that the Red Sox have kept most of their amateur scouting group in place. They replaced 1 cross-checker and 2 area scouts this year, but the cross-checker and one of the area scouts, Chris Mears and Reed Grignani, respectively, are still with the organization in player dev. Grignani was the guy who scouted inside Noah Song last year, so I'm sure that he's a guy that they're going to want to have in the room. So, a lot of that group is still together. It wouldn't surprise me. I should also mention their former amateur scouting director, Mike Rickard, is now moved up to a VP of scouting. So Paul Taboni is the amateur scouting director right now. He's the one who's going to have his hand on the button. Don't know how much that'll change things. I would expect to see them more or less stay with things they like. Former Team USA players who were on the Cape who they've gotten really familiar with. So we'll see if that holds true this year. I would expect them to more or less stay with that. And as far as demographics, they're willing to go anywhere. If you go back to 2011 and look at their first pick overall in those drafts, it's 3 college hitters, 2 college pitchers, 2 high school pitchers, and 2 high school hitters. So they're willing to, dip into whatever demographic is available at that spot. I would expect them to do the same this year, especially if someone falls to them that maybe otherwise wouldn't have in a different season.
Cool. And one question I wanted to ask is, some of the names that you've heard associated with the Sox up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, the guy that we're seeing mocked the most often is Mick Abel, the high school arm out of Oregon. Gets it up to 97. Didn't get to pitch this spring. Maybe they see that as having less mileage on the arm for a high school guy. They do like when they draft their pitchers to take guys who maybe college arms who started their careers in the bullpen and then moved into the rotation, as opposed to guys who've been in the weekend rotation, for all 3 years that they've been at school. So Abel might fit that way. Jared Kelly, kind of the other big high school arm, is another guy that we've heard them connected with. I could also see them popping one of the high school outfielders, whether it's a Robert Hassel or a Pete Crow Armstrong. Those are guys we've also heard associated with them. It's been reassuring to hear that after Ian and I popped Hassel on the mock draft. So, those are guys that they've been potentially looking at. Maybe the high school catcher Tyler Soderstrom might be another guy they're interested in if he's there. Catcher is a position of stark weakness in the system, which is why we've seen them, looking to upgrade that position in some of the recent trades they made, getting Connor Wong thrown in the Mookie Betts deal, things like that. You're maybe not drafting for positional need, but if that lines up, it's not a bad thing, right? And then, of course, Garrett Crochet, the pitcher out of Tennessee, is another guy we've heard connected with them. Reading his scouting report reminds me a little bit of the Tanner Houck situation, where it's a guy who, all right, you can try and make it work in the rotation, but if that doesn't work, you've probably got a late inning reliever, and I think they might be okay with that outcome. Use their prospect capital in other ways to kind of fill in other holes if that's where he winds up. They really don't have a future closer candidate or anything like that in the system, so that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. It could go any number of ways, and I'm sure, like I said, the big thing is if they're going to keep an eye out if someone's falling that otherwise wouldn't, because a high school bat that teams think is going to be an overslot sign. I think they'd be willing to do that in order to stock up a system that is starting to grow in depth. It's not as bad as it was, a year ago, but maybe a year and a half ago might have been it kind of at its nadir, but it's coming back up depth wise. But they do need blue chippers. Behind Tristan Costas and Jeter Downs, there's not really a lot of high-end blue chip type talent. That's when you're getting into the Dahlbecks and Matas, and then it kind of falls off again. So, bring in a guy that might have that blue chip upside might be worth it for them over a guy with a high floor that maybe the ceiling isn't quite there.
Absolutely. Totally agree. And I think they're in, a position to take advantage of, some of these top talents that potentially fall and end up with a guy that, might have been a top 10 talent, in a draft like 2019, just simply because of, sort of the bunch up there and how deep this class really is, especially with, some ready-made college guys. And then, of course, just the situation of, the way the draft is, financial situations of, other teams. It's really thrown everything, obviously, totally into flux. But real quick, give me a name. Who do you hope the Red Sox come away with on draft night?
I mean, partially selfishly because we took him in the mock with you guys, but I like Robert Hassel as a guy with a great hit tool in the outfield, as a guy who, they've got time to let him percolate because the outfield really is in a position of need right now. We'll see what happens after this year with Jackie Bradley being a free agent. But they've got Verdugo and they've got Benintendi around for a little bit. So they've got a little bit of time to let him percolate because in the minors, there's really not a whole lot there in the outfield. And it's not a position they've spent a lot of draft capital on going back to, say, 2014. So I'd love it if it were Hassel. But some of those other guys, Abel, Kelly, there's a lot of exciting possibilities there at 17. Like you said, it's a deep year. And I think they'll take advantage of it, especially where they're missing that second round pick and can't really get someone that falls to that spot in the second round.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that, is a disadvantage of course, not having that second round pick. They're not going to be able to, pick up on maybe some of these outfielders, college players, ready-made guys that, might be a roll 50, but, ultimately probably drop into the second round and are really signable and for a decent number. And they're probably not going to be able to land one of those guys, unfortunately. But Chris, thanks for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for tuning in, viewers. This is the Boston Red Sox draft preview.